I'm Eliza Bennett, 32 years old, and right now I'm standing in my grandmother's sprawling mansion for our annual utterly pretentious family conference. Honestly, I feel like an alien among relatives who are practically dripping in designer labels and ridiculously expensive luxury watches. My simple blazer and modest jewelry, chosen for comfort and professionalism, draw condescending whispers and sideways glances despite us sharing the exact same bloodline. For 10 long years, I've endured their thinly veiled mockery about my supposed financial struggles, while I've been silently, painstakingly building my own empire. Little do they know what's tucked securely in my briefcase today is about to change everything. Before I dive into the heart of this deliciously satisfying story, I'd absolutely love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below, hit that subscribe button, and stick around to see how I finally showed my status-obsessed family what real wealth and real power truly looks like. My family, the Bennetts, have been fixtures in Boston real estate since the roaring 1920s, when my great-grandfather shrewdly turned a small inheritance into a budding empire during the post-war boom. By the time my formidable grandmother Elizabeth took over in the 1970s, the Bennett name was synonymous with luxury properties across New England. But unlike her brothers who focused on flash and outward status, Grandma Elizabeth was a truly shrewd businesswoman who firmly believed that wealth should be quiet, purposeful, and above all, impactful. My father, her youngest son, inherited her pragmatic and understated approach. He fell deeply in love with my mother, a kind kindergarten teacher with absolutely no family money, causing quite the scandal and much dismay among the status-conscious Bennetts. They chose a modest, unassuming life in a small suburb, much to the family's disappointment. Dad worked as an architect, passionately designing homes he genuinely believed people would love living in, rather than soulless status symbols, while Mom continued teaching, pouring her heart into her students. They instilled in me the invaluable lesson that money was simply a tool, a means to an end, not a personality trait or a measure of one's worth. When I was just 15, my world collapsed overnight. They died tragically in a car accident, coming home from a weekend trip leaving me utterly adrift. Grandma Elizabeth, with her quiet strength, immediately took me in, while my aunts and uncles whispered that I had rather inconveniently become the charity case of the family. In those first painful, grief-stricken months, I'd often find Grandma in her study late at night, meticulously looking through old photo albums or reviewing complex property portfolios. "Eliza," she would say, her voice soft but firm. "Most of the family has forgotten what wealth is actually for. They think it's about showing off. But real wealth is invisible. It's security, it's opportunity, and it's the power to effect real meaningful change." During the 3 formative years I lived with her before college, she taught me more about finance, astute investment, and property valuation than any formal course ever could. She showed me how to read subtle market trends, how to identify truly undervalued properties, and most importantly, how to be patient, a virtue utterly lost on the rest of the family. My cousins, Brad, Victoria, Taylor, Jessica, and Blake, grew up very differently. Uncle Richard, who arrogantly took over as family patriarch. After Grandpa died, firmly believed in conspicuous consumption. His children and those of my other aunts and uncles received flashy sports cars for their 16th birthdays, took extravagant luxury vacations every school break, and wore only the most expensive designer clothes. Meanwhile, I quietly drove the used Toyota my parents had left me, worked multiple part-time jobs, and invested every single penny I could spare, diligently following Grandma's whispered advice. Grandma Elizabeth passed away during my senior year of college, leaving each grandchild a modest but still significant inheritance. While my cousins squandered theirs on down payments for ostentatious luxury condos, exotic vacations, or even more ridiculously, Blake bought a small yacht he barely uses. I followed my grandmother's quiet wisdom. I lived simply in a small, unassuming apartment, continued working diligently and strategically, invested my inheritance in small, often overlooked properties in up-and-coming neighborhoods, properties that had genuine potential rather than immediate flash. The annual family conference began as Grandma Elizabeth's way of ensuring family unity and shared purpose. After her death, however, Uncle Richard, with his insatiable need for validation, swiftly transformed it into a vulgar display of status competition, who had the most impressive portfolio update, who had acquired the most expensive possessions, which cousin boasted the most impressive career trajectory. Every single year, I would show up in my modest, unassuming clothes, share my deliberately understated updates, and endure their thinly veiled pity and condescension. What none of them knew, however, was that by my 28th birthday, my meticulously managed portfolio had quietly grown to include 12 residential properties and 3 small commercial buildings, all discreetly purchased through anonymous LLCs with the expert guidance of Grandma's shrewd old lawyer, Mr. Winters. Just last year, I learned that the sprawling apartment complex where Uncle Richard's daughter Victoria, my cousin Blake, and 3 other extended family members lived had quietly gone on the market. The owner was retiring and looking for a quiet, discreet sale to avoid alarming tenants. Using a sophisticated holding company structure that Mr. Winters meticulously helped me establish, I purchased the entire building for a staggering $28 million, nearly every cent of my available liquid capital. I then implemented subtle, intelligent improvements, all while keeping my ownership completely anonymous, even raising the rent slightly, though it remained well below the inflated market rate. And now, as I prepared for this year's conference, I received word that Uncle Richard, with his usual disregard for genuine sentiment, planned to propose selling Grandma's mansion itself, the very heart of our family legacy and the last tangible connection to her profound wisdom. The same mansion where I'm now standing, watching my family flaunt their ill-gotten wealth, utterly unaware that the poor relation they've mocked for years actually owns the very roof over many of their heads. I pulled up to Grandma's mansion on Friday afternoon, in my trusty 10-year-old Toyota, the same car I'd been driving since college. The circular driveway already gleamed with an arrogant display of luxury vehicles. Brad's gleaming new Maserati parked prominently near the front steps, Aunt Catherine's sleek Mercedes SUV, Uncle Richard's imposing Bentley, and various other high-end cars that probably cost more than most people's houses. I carefully parked my humble Toyota between Blake's enormous Range Rover and Victoria's pristine BMW, my car looking like it had accidentally wandered into the wrong, very expensive neighborhood. Taking a deep breath, I smoothed down my simple navy blazer from Banana Republic and checked my minimal makeup in the rearview mirror, steeling myself. The mansion looked exactly as it always had. 3 stories of elegant brick Georgian architecture, with stately white columns flanking the entrance, and perfectly manicured gardens stretching across 4 serene acres. Walking up the cool limestone steps, I felt a familiar bittersweet blend of warmth and apprehension. This place had been my sanctuary after losing my parents, my quiet refuge. But now it painfully represented the widening gulf between my life choices and those of my status-obsessed relatives. I'd arrived purposely early, hoping to soak in some peaceful memories before the full family circus descended. Martha, the housekeeper, a dear woman who had served our family for over 30 years, opened the door before I could even ring the bell. "Miss Eliza?" She beamed, her kind face crinkling with warmth, pulling me into a warm, comforting hug that smelled faintly of lemon furniture polish and cinnamon. "So wonderful to see you. You look more like your grandmother every year." I smiled genuinely for the first time that day. "Thanks, Martha," I replied, my voice soft. "You're still the best welcome committee this place has." She lowered her voice conspiratorially, leaning in slightly. "You might want to know that Mr. Richard has been here since morning rearranging the conference schedule and meeting with the family attorney." This wasn't surprising, but it confirmed my growing suspicions about the mansion sale. Martha helped me carry my weekend bag to my old room, the very one I'd lived in during those formative healing years with Grandma. Unlike the other guest rooms that had been redecorated multiple times over the years, this one remained largely unchanged. The same pale blue walls, simple white furniture, and a cherished window seat overlooking the rose garden that Grandma had loved so much. I ran my fingers over the bookshelf, still holding my old favorite's dense finance textbooks, mingling comfortably with beloved novels, the worn notebook where Grandma had meticulously taught me to track stock movements, and the small framed photo of my parents and me at Cape Cod taken the summer before they died. I was unpacking when a soft knock came at the door. My cousin Jessica stood there, a genuinely warm smile on her face. She was quite honestly the only family member who had ever shown me consistent, unadulterated kindness. "Thought I heard you arrive?" she smiled, leaning casually against the doorframe. Unlike our other cousins, Jessica had built her own successful career as a pediatrician, though she still maintained the expected level of family luxury. She wore designer jeans and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my entire outfit, but her eyes held none of the judgment I usually faced. "I wanted to warn you before everyone shows up," she said, her voice dropping slightly. "Uncle Richard has big plans this weekend. He's going to propose selling the mansion." Though I'd suspected this, hearing it confirmed made my stomach sink with a sickening lurch. "But this place is our heritage. Grandma would never have wanted that." Jessica sighed, coming to sit beside me on the bed. "I know, but he's talking about unlocking the property value and modernizing family assets. He's already got most of the votes lined up." Votes. The Bennett family governance structure was another of Uncle Richard's self-serving innovations. After Grandma passed, family decisions were weighted by one's contribution to the overall family holdings, meaning Richard, as the most commercially successful in his mind, effectively controlled most decisions. My small publicly declared holdings gave me minimal, almost negligible voting power. "Is that why we're meeting for 3 days instead of the usual 2? I asked, a dawning realization.
Jessica nodded. Property discussions, Saturday, financial reviews Sunday, and the big vote Monday. He's even bringing in developers to present concepts for luxury condos where the mansion would be. My heart sank further. This place wasn't just a building. It was the last physical connection to Grandma's wisdom and values, a tangible piece of her enduring spirit. The thought of it being demolished for yet more high-end real estate felt almost sacrilegious, a profound insult to her memory. "I'm going to fight this," I said quietly, my voice firm despite the rising lump in my throat.
Jessica squeezed my hand, a silent gesture of support.
"I know, and I'll back you, but be prepared for serious resistance." She glanced at her watch. "Everyone's gathering for dinner in 20 minutes. Victoria's already asked twice if the poor cousin has arrived yet." I forced a small, brittle smile. Wouldn't want to disappoint her. After Jessica left, I took a moment to center myself. I'd come to this conference with a carefully crafted plan, but now the stakes felt even higher, the emotional weight even heavier. Dinner that evening was exactly as expected. Crystal glasses clinking, fine china gleaming, and conversation meticulously designed to highlight everyone's latest, most extravagant achievements. Uncle Richard held court at the head of the long table, precisely where Grandma used to sit, grandiosely talking about his latest development project. "Completely sold out before construction even finished," he boasted, swirling his 30-year-old scotch with a smug air. "We even had to turn away buyers." Aunt Catherine, never one to be outdone, chimed in about her charity gala that had raised more than last year's by a cool $100,000, while pointedly noting that she hadn't seen Eliza's name on any philanthropic donor lists lately. My cousin Brad, now an executive at Uncle Richard's company, solely due to blatant nepotism, kept shamelessly directing the conversation toward his new Maserati. "The waiting list was 9 months, but they expedited it for our family name." He smirked, his eyes flickering towards me. "What are you driving these days, Eliza? Still that Toyota?" I took a slow sip of water, carefully composed. "Still serving me perfectly well." Uncle Richard's wife, Patricia, made a sympathetic clucking sound. "You know, dear, if you'd just let Richard mentor you in some property investments, you could afford to upgrade your lifestyle a bit." I bit back the urge to inform her that my property investments were doing just fine, thank you very much, without Richard's condescending mentoring. Instead, I simply smiled, a serene, unreadable expression on my face. I'm comfortable with my choices. The subtle digs, like tiny, irritating pinpricks, continued throughout dinner. Veiled references to exclusive clubs I didn't belong to, pointed comparisons of vacation homes. I didn't own ostentatious discussions of private school options for cousins' children that I obviously couldn't afford if I had kids. Despite it all, I maintained a stubborn flicker of hope that once they truly understood the full picture, there might be a path to genuine family connection. After dinner, I walked the sprawling grounds alone, seeking solace in Grandma's beloved rose garden, now softly illuminated by gentle landscape lighting. Standing there among her carefully cultivated flowers, I resolved again to preserve her legacy, both the physical mansion and the invaluable values she'd so patiently instilled in me. Whatever happened this weekend, I would find a way to honor her memory, even if it meant finally revealing what I'd been meticulously building all these years quietly in the shadows. Saturday morning arrived with glorious golden autumn sunshine streaming through the curtains of my childhood bedroom. I dressed carefully in crisp black slacks and a simple, elegant blue blouse, professional, but not overtly showy. The main family conference would begin at 9:00 a.m. in the grand drawing room where generations of Bennetts had made decisions that shaped our family fortune. Entering the room, I immediately felt a palpable shift in atmosphere. The usual family portraits had been conspicuously removed from the walls, replaced instead with cold, sleek architectural renderings of modern condominiums. Uncle Richard stood imposingly at the front beside a digital projector, while my cousins and their spouses filled the antique chairs arranged in a neat semicircle. Several faces I didn't recognize sat in the back row, presumably the developers Jessica had mentioned.
"Ah, Eliza, good of you to join us," Uncle Richard announced, his voice dripping with condescension, as I slipped into a seat beside Jessica. We were just about to begin our discussion on family image and standards. I nodded politely, noticing how several cousins exchanged smug glances when I sat down. Richard launched into his presentation, clicking through slides that showed the Bennett Family Holdings logo emblazoned on increasingly luxurious and ostentatious buildings. "Image is currency in our world," he proclaimed, pacing importantly in his Italian leather shoes that probably cost more than my monthly rent. "The Bennett name opens doors, but only if we maintain certain standards in how we present ourselves to the world." His gaze lingered meaningfully on me for a moment before continuing. After discussing several development projects already in progress, he advanced to a slide subtly labeled Family Residence Reassessment. My heart sank as a beautifully photographed yet cold image of Grandma's beloved mansion appeared on screen. "As you all know," Richard began, his voice devoid of any real sentiment,
This property has been in our family for 4 generations. While it holds sentimental value, it's sitting on 5 acres of prime real estate, currently valued at approximately $45 million. Aunt Victoria, elegant in her designer suit with perfectly highlighted hair, raised her manicured hand, a picture of polished concern. Richard, before you continue, I think we should acknowledge that some family members might be emotionally attached to the old house. She turned to me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, a thinly veiled patronization. Eliza, dear, I know you lived here for a time, and we all respect that, but surely you understand that sentimentality can't stand in the way of sound financial decisions.
Before I could respond, my cousin Blake, always eager to show off, jumped in. Speaking of sound financial decisions, has anyone seen my new SL Roadster outside? Just picked it up yesterday. Limited edition, only 20 in North America. The not-so-subtle topic change was clearly designed to emphasize the vast gap between my financial status and theirs.
Very nice. Richard nodded approvingly. That's exactly the kind of statement piece that reinforces our family's position in the community. He then smoothly continued with his presentation, outlining a plan to sell the mansion, divide the proceeds among family shareholders, weighted by current holdings naturally, and develop luxury condominiums on the property. The developers in the back row began distributing glossy full-color brochures, showing sleek renderings of glass and steel structures bearing absolutely no resemblance to the warm, inviting brick home that had sheltered generations of our family.
The projected return on investment is substantial, Richard concluded triumphantly, a smug grin spreading across his face. Any questions before we move to preliminary voting?
I raised my hand, and Richard acknowledged me with barely concealed impatience. I think we should consider Grandma Elizabeth's wishes, I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. She specifically wanted this house preserved as our family gathering place and historical anchor. She told me many times that not everything should be measured by its potential return on investment.
Uncle Richard's smile tightened, a flicker of irritation in his eyes. While Elizabeth had many admirable qualities, the market has changed considerably since her time. What made sense then doesn't necessarily make sense now.
Aunt Catherine tittered a dismissive sound. Besides, Eliza, with your limited experience in high-value real estate, perhaps this isn't an area where your input carries much weight.
I persisted, my resolve strengthening. I've analyzed the property values and neighborhood trends. This location's historic value actually increases its worth as a preserved property, rather than being demolished for yet another luxury development that might sit half empty like the Westbrook project did last year.
The room fell silent for a moment before Brad gave a short, dismissive laugh full of arrogant disdain. Analysis. What would you know about real estate? You can't even afford a house of your own. You're still renting that little apartment downtown, aren't you? Several cousins snickered, and I felt heat rise to my cheeks, a familiar sting.
My housing choices are deliberate, not limitations, I replied, my voice calm but firm. But Brad, unwilling to let go, talked over me, his voice laced with sneering superiority. Sure they are. Just like my choice to drive a $150,000 car instead of a 10-year-old Toyota is deliberate. Some of us can afford our choices, cousin. Others just pretend their limitations are choices.
Richard, eager to move things along, cleared his throat. Let's take a preliminary vote on the concept of selling and redeveloping. We can address specific proposals after lunch. The vote was exactly as Jessica had predicted, overwhelmingly, in favor of selling, with only Jessica and me opposed. As we broke for lunch, I felt a crushing weight of disappointment. It wasn't just about losing the house. It was the painful realization that my family truly saw me as nothing more than the poor relation, someone whose opinion had no value because her bank account didn't impress them. Jessica found me in the garden during lunch, sitting on the cool stone bench, where Grandma used to tell me fascinating stories about our family's vibrant history. I'm sorry, she said, sitting softly beside me. They can be such snobs. I nodded, fighting back the hot tears that threatened to spill. It's not even about the money. They've never bothered to ask what I actually do with my life or why I make the choices I make. They just assume I'm struggling and failing to keep up. Jessica squeezed my hand. For what it's worth, I've always admired how you've charted your own path. There's something truly admirable about not needing to show off all the time. I smiled gratefully, but the morning's confrontation had left a deeper wound than I'd expected. All these years, I told myself that my family's opinion didn't matter, that I was building something meaningful regardless of their superficial approval. But their casual cruelty and outright dismissal still hurt in ways I hadn't anticipated. As we walked back toward the house, Jessica lowered her voice. Just so you know, tomorrow's session will be worse. Everyone has to present their personal financial highlights for the year. Richard always structures it to emphasize who's contributing most to the family prestige. I nodded, already dreading it. Thanks for the warning. That evening at dinner, the conversation revolved exclusively around which extravagant luxury amenities should be included in the new condominium development that would replace our cherished family home. As I listened to them debate passionately between infinity pools or private rooftop gardens, between imported Italian marble or rare limestone finishes, I realized how fundamentally different our values had become. While I sat silently contemplating the growing chasm-like divide between my family and me, I couldn't help but wonder if there would ever be a bridge across it, or if I even wanted there to be one anymore. Sunday morning's session focused on inheritance matters and property holdings, the very meat of our annual family conference. The drawing room had been meticulously rearranged overnight, with a long, gleaming mahogany table, replacing yesterday's casual seating arrangement. Uncle Richard took his position at the head, with expensive leather portfolios placed at each setting. Mine, I couldn't help noticing, was conspicuously thinner than everyone else's. "Today, we'll review our individual and collective holdings," Richard announced, his voice booming with self-importance after everyone was seated. "As you know, our family voting structure is weighted by contribution to overall assets. I've taken the liberty of preparing an updated assessment." He nodded to his assistant, who distributed spreadsheets showing each family member's declared assets and their corresponding voting power. As expected, Richard himself controlled 38% of the votes, with his children and siblings holding most of the remainder. My own voting share was listed at a mere 2%, reflecting only the small inheritance from Grandma that I'd publicly acknowledged, plus my modest salary as a financial consultant, my deliberately vague job title. "Before we begin individual presentations," Richard continued, "I'd like to propose some adjustments to the distribution framework established in Elizabeth's will." This caught my attention immediately. Grandma's will had included some crucial protection mechanisms to prevent any single family member from gaining too much control from becoming an autocrat. Richard was now suggesting streamlining these protections for administrative efficiency. The proposed changes would effectively consolidate even more power with the wealthiest family members, particularly himself. As family members nodded along, seemingly oblivious or uncaring, I carefully noted each suggested modification. These would be crucial details to discuss with Mr. Winters later. After the inheritance discussion, we moved to individual financial updates. Brad went first, proudly describing his new position as vice president in Uncle Richard's company, a clear case of nepotism, the enormous bonuses he'd received, and his impressive portfolio of luxury investments. "And of course there's the new vacation property in Aspen," he concluded smugly, "closed on it last month. 4 bedrooms, ski-in, ski-out access, and a hot tub overlooking the mountains." Next came Blake boasting about his supposed tech startup investments and the yacht he'd upgraded, because the last one just wasn't quite big enough for proper entertaining. Victoria detailed her expanded art collection and the exclusive private school where she'd secured coveted spots for her children, despite a 5-year waiting list. "They made an exception for the Bennett name, of course," she purred. One by one, my relatives outlined their expanding wealth and ever-growing collection of status symbols. Each presentation met with appreciative nods and fawning follow-up questions. When Taylor mentioned struggling to find household staff for her 3 sprawling homes, Aunt Catherine immediately offered contacts for the best agency for domestic help. "They only work with certain families, but I'll put in a word," she boasted. The conversation eventually turned inevitably to the luxury apartment complex where several family members lived. The very building I secretly owned. "The amenities are top-notch," Victoria commented, her voice casual. "But the management has been making some changes I don't particularly care for. They've been renovating the lobby, disrupting everyone with construction noise." Blake nodded vigorously, his face twisted in annoyance. "And they raised the rent last quarter. Not significantly, but still on principle. Who do they think they are?" Brad leaned forward, eyes narrowing with a predatory glint. "You know what's strange? No one seems to know who actually owns the building now. It was purchased by some holding company last year. Very mysterious." Uncle Richard tapped his pen thoughtfully against his expensive leather portfolio. "Perhaps we should leverage some family connections to find out who's behind the purchase. If it's some investment group, they might be persuaded to sell to us instead. The location is prime, and having control would truly benefit those of you living there." I maintained a neutral, unreadable expression, though my heart raced at how casually they discussed using their influence to pressure the mystery owner me into selling against my wishes. "We could apply some pressure through the right channels," Richard continued, a shark-like smile spreading across his face. "I know people at the city planning office who could make approvals for their future renovations challenging." The casual way they discussed using their connections to essentially bully a property owner to twist regulations in their favor made my blood boil. This was exactly the kind of entitled, arrogant behavior Grandma had always criticized, using family power not to create value, but to cynically take it from others. "And Eliza," Brad added with a smug smirk, turning to me, his eyes gleaming with malicious satisfaction, "this is how real estate actually works in the real world. Not that you'd understand since you can't even afford your own place. Still renting that tiny apartment downtown, right? The room fell silent for a moment before uncomfortable, stifled laughter broke out, less restrained now, more openly mocking. It wasn't just the mockery that infuriated me. It was the casual corruption they embraced, the sheer hypocrisy of claiming to uphold the Bennett legacy while trampling on every principle Grandma had ever taught. Speaking of real estate, Richard smoothly transitioned, bringing the discussion back to his agenda. Let's finalize our decision about this property. He gestured around at the mansion, a symbol of heritage reduced to a mere commodity in his eyes. The developers have presented an excellent offer, and the projected returns from converting to luxury condominiums would benefit all shareholders. I raised my hand, determined to make one last desperate attempt at preserving Grandma's home. Before we vote, I'd like to propose an alternative. This house has historical value beyond its real estate potential. What if we converted it into a Bennett Family Foundation headquarters? We could preserve the architecture while creating something that truly honors Grandma's legacy of community investment and purposeful impact. Richard's expression made it painfully clear he'd already dismissed the idea before I'd even finished speaking. While that's a creative suggestion, Eliza, the financial return would be minimal compared to development. We have to be practical about these assets. Aunt Catherine nodded, her voice sharp. Besides, a foundation would require considerable ongoing management. Some of us... She glanced meaningfully at me, a condescending smirk on her face. Might have time for such projects, but those of us actively growing the family fortune have other more pressing priorities. The vote that followed was a mere formality, a predetermined outcome. With Richard controlling nearly 40% and his eager allies, another 45%, my paltry 2%, and Jessica's 5% made no discernible difference. The decision to sell Grandma's beloved home and replace it with more luxury condominiums passed with overwhelming, resounding support. As Richard outlined the timeline for vacating the property and beginning demolition, I felt a strange, profound calm settle over me. This wasn't just about a house anymore. It was about the very soul of our family and the precious values that had been abandoned, trampled upon in the relentless pursuit of status and superficial material display. Later that evening, I called Mr. Winters from the privacy of my room, gazing out at the garden where Grandma had taught me about patient investing and true value. They voted to sell the mansion, I told him, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. And they're planning to use family connections to pressure the mystery owner of Victoria's building into selling. Mr. Winters chuckled softly, a knowing sound. They have no idea who they're dealing with, do they? Are you still planning to reveal yourself tomorrow? I watched the sunset painting Grandma's roses in shades of gold and crimson, a fiery promise of the day to come. Yes, but I need your help with something else first. Can you prepare documents transferring my ownership of Bennett Capital Holdings to a new entity, one that would allow me to purchase this property before they can sell it to developers? There was a brief, pregnant pause before he replied, his voice filled with quiet admiration. Elizabeth always said you were the one who truly understood the meaning of legacy. I'll have everything ready for the morning. What name do you want for the new entity? I smiled, remembering Grandma's favorite quote about wealth being a tool, not a trophy, a means to an end, not an end in itself. Call it Elizabeth's Legacy Trust. After ending the call, I spent hours meticulously reviewing the complete documentation of my holdings, preparing for the revelation that would forever change my relationship with my family. The sharp hurt and burning anger I'd felt earlier had crystallized into something far more powerful, an absolute clarity about who I was and what I stood for. Whether they accepted me or not no longer mattered. I was a Bennett in the ways that truly counted, in the ways Grandma cherished, and tomorrow they would finally undeniably understand exactly what that meant. That night, alone in my childhood bedroom, I spread all my meticulously organized portfolio documents across the bed, organizing them precisely for tomorrow's monumental revelation. The complete picture was, even to me, incredibly impressive. 15 properties in total, including 3 thriving commercial buildings in rapidly developing areas. 12 residential properties in prime locations, and of course the luxury apartment complex where several family members currently lived, blissfully unaware of my ownership. My total assets, carefully documented, exceeded $73 million, more than Brad, Blake, and Victoria, combined, a truly staggering sum. I organized everything into a sleek leather portfolio I'd purchased specifically for this moment. One that ironically perfectly matched the expensive ones my cousins flaunted at family meetings. The irony wasn't lost on me that this was the first time I'd ever spent money on appearance rather than pure substance. But tomorrow was about making a statement they couldn't possibly ignore. As I worked, memories flooded back, Grandma sitting with me in this very room, patiently teaching me her philosophy of patient wealth building. The problem with showing off your money, Eliza, she'd said, her voice gentle but firm, is that you're always spending instead of growing. True wealth isn't about displaying status. It's about creating security and opportunity. I remembered how she'd taught me to meticulously analyze neighborhood development patterns to identify properties with long-term appreciation potential rather than immediate prestige value. While my cousins were thoughtlessly buying luxury condos in already established overpriced neighborhoods, I diligently followed Grandma's counterintuitive advice to look for overlooked areas on the cusp of revitalization. My first purchase had been a small duplex in a neighborhood that other, less discerning investors had dismissed as transitional. I'd lived in one unit and rented out the other, using the consistent income to offset my mortgage while property values steadily climbed. 2 years later, I sold it for nearly double my initial investment and rolled the substantial profits into 2 more properties, continuing the pattern of living simply while my portfolio silently strategically expanded. The apartment complex had been my biggest gamble, investing nearly every liquid asset I had into a single property. But the location was unbeatable, and my meticulous analysis showed strong appreciation potential with relatively minor upgrades. Using these sophisticated LLC structures Mr. Winters had helped establish, I'd maintained complete anonymity as the owner, implementing intelligent improvements that significantly increased both the building's value and tenant satisfaction, despite what my complaining cousins might believe.
I pulled out the original handwritten investment journal Grandma had given me when I turned 18. The first entry in my unsteady teenage handwriting detailed the humble $500 I'd invested in a mutual fund she'd recommended. Page after page chronicled my journey, first small stock purchases, then increasingly sophisticated investment decisions, all meticulously following her core principles of patience, thorough research, and focusing on true value over fleeting flash. I traced my finger over her neat annotations in the margins. Excellent analysis. Eliza, and consider the 10-year potential, not the 2-year return. These invaluable notes had guided me, providing unwavering mentorship even when she was no longer here to advise me directly. My phone chimed softly with a message from Mr. Winters. All documents prepared as requested. Elizabeth's Legacy Trust established. Ready to proceed at your signal tomorrow. I texted back my sincere thanks. Then continued organizing my portfolio, making sure every document was arranged for maximum undeniable impact. This wasn't just about revealing my financial success. It was about honoring Grandma's true legacy of thoughtful stewardship and quiet, indomitable strength. Around midnight, a soft knock at my door surprised me. Jessica stood in the hallway, concern evident in her expression. "Just checking if you're okay," she whispered, her voice gentle. "You were so quiet at dinner." I hesitated for a moment before stepping aside to let her in quickly, gathering the revealing documents spread across my bed. Her eyes widened instantly, fixating on the property deeds and financial statements. "Eliza, what is all this?" I trusted Jessica more than anyone else in the family, but I'd kept my secret for far too long to reveal it casually now. "Just preparing for tomorrow," I said vaguely, hoping to buy myself a moment. She picked up a folder I'd missed, the one containing documentation of my ownership of the luxury apartment complex where she, along with Victoria and Blake, lived. Her jaw dropped, her eyes scanning the title deed with growing disbelief. You're the mysterious owner they've been complaining about." I nodded, a wave of relief washing over me at finally sharing my overwhelming secret with someone who might actually understand. "Please don't tell them yet. I'm planning to reveal everything tomorrow." Jessica sank onto the window seat, shaking her head slowly in stunned disbelief. "All these years, they've been treating you like the struggling poor relation, and you've been—" "What, a secret millionaire?" I smiled at her astonishment. "I followed Grandma's advice about patient investing and living below my means. The less they noticed me, the more freely I could operate without family interference." Jessica laughed softly, a genuine, joyful sound. "Brad is going to have a heart attack. He was just saying tonight that someone should explain basic real estate principles to you, so you could at least afford a decent car." Her expression then turned serious, thoughtful. "Are you sure you want to do this? Once they know, everything will change. They'll either resent you or suddenly become your best friends. Neither option is particularly appealing." I joined her on the window seat, looking out at the moonlit garden, now a place of peace, not quiet scheming. "I don't need their approval anymore," I said, my voice resolute. "But I do need to honor Grandma's legacy, the real legacy, not the distorted, superficial version Uncle Richard has created." I then explained my bold plan to purchase the mansion through Elizabeth's Legacy Trust before Richard could sell it to greedy developers. Jessica squeezed my hand, her eyes shining with admiration. "She would be so proud of you." After she left, I meticulously laid out what I would wear for the final confrontation, a simple but perfectly tailored charcoal suit I'd purchased from a boutique in New York last year, but had saved specifically for a special occasion. Nothing flashy or overtly designer labeled,
but quietly elegant in a way that truly reflected my actual values, rather than the family's obsession with obvious status symbols. I also carefully selected my grandmother's simple pearl necklace, the one precious piece of family jewelry I'd inherited, and the perfect symbol of her unwavering belief in understated elegance and quiet strength. As I finally prepared for bed, I felt strangely serenely calm. Tomorrow would change everything, but I was ready. The frightened, insecure orphan who had once meekly accepted their condescension was gone. In her place stood a woman who had meticulously built something substantial and meaningful by honoring the true Bennett values, not of displaying wealth, but of creating it thoughtfully and using it purposefully. Whatever happened tomorrow, I would face it knowing that the person who had truly understood what the Bennett legacy should mean would be standing with me in spirit. "Watch me tomorrow, Grandma," I whispered to the moonlit room. "I think you'll be proud." Tuesday morning arrived with a crystal clarity that seemed almost fitting for the day of reckoning. I dressed with deliberate care in my tailored charcoal suit, fastening Grandma's cherished pearl necklace and adding delicate pearl studs that had belonged to my mother. Looking in the mirror, I saw not the poor relation my family had dismissed for years, but a woman of undeniable substance and profound purpose. For the first time, I applied a touch of vibrant red lipstick, not to impress them, but as war paint for the battle ahead, a silent symbol of my resolve. I arrived at the conference room 10 minutes early, placing my sleek leather portfolio precisely at my usual seat, then stepping out to the hallway for a few moments to center myself to collect my thoughts to steady my resolve. When I returned at exactly 900 a.m., the family had assembled in their usual predictable formation. Uncle Richard at the head of the table, surrounded by his inner circle of sycophants, with those of lesser standing, arranged in descending order of perceived importance. Jessica caught my eye and gave a subtle nod of encouragement, a silent promise of support. "Good, we're all here," Richard began, not bothering to acknowledge my arrival, his voice dismissive. "Today, we'll finalize the mansion sale arrangements and discuss the apartment complex situation." He gestured to his assistant to distribute folders containing what appeared to be developer contracts. "The Westbrook Development Group has offered $48 million for the property, with construction to begin next month. Their legal team has prepared the preliminary agreements for all shareholders to sign today." As folders circulated around the table, I remained perfectly still, watching the family's excited murmurs as they eagerly reviewed the substantial payouts they would receive based on the current shareholding structure. Uncle Richard stood to gain nearly $18 million from the sale, while my mere 2% share would yield less than $1 million, still significant money, but a mere fraction of what the others with their inflated egos and contributions would receive. "Now," Richard continued, his gaze sweeping across the room, "regarding the apartment complex matter, Jenkins has identified some potential leverage points with the mysterious owner. We've drafted a letter from the family attorney suggesting certain code compliance reviews might be forthcoming, unless they're willing to discuss a reasonable offer." The casualness with which he described what amounted to legal harassment and outright intimidation made my blood boil, but I maintained my composed, unreadable expression. "Before we move forward with either of these items," I said, my voice strong, clear, and more confident than it had ever been in a family meeting, "I'd like to request the floor for a brief presentation of my own." Richard checked his watch impatiently, a clear sign of his disdain. "We have a tight schedule today, Eliza. The developers are expecting our signed agreements by noon." "This won't take long," I replied, standing and moving purposefully to the front of the room without waiting for his permission. The unusual assertiveness of my movement caused several cousins to exchange surprised, bewildered glances. I opened my portfolio and removed a single impactful document, the most recent meticulously prepared valuation of my complete holdings. For years, I've listened to assumptions about my financial situation. I began making deliberate eye contact with each family member in turn, letting my words sink in. I've heard the whispers about the poor relation and endured the condescension, the pity, and occasionally the outright mockery. Brad shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his face reddening while Victoria suddenly became intensely interested in her manicure. Yesterday, Uncle Richard presented a graph showing each family member's contribution to our collective wealth. I continued, my voice calm, controlled. "I think it's time to update that data." I handed the valuation summary to Richard's assistant, instructing her to display it on the projector. As the document appeared on screen, starkly showing my net worth of $73 million, a stunned, absolute silence fell over the room. Jaws literally dropped. "This can't be right," Brad finally sputtered, his face flushing a furious red. "There must be some mistake." I smiled coolly, a serene, knowing smile. "No mistake. While you've been buying sports cars and vacation homes, I've been building a real estate portfolio that outperforms most of yours combined." I began distributing copies of my complete financial statement, enjoying the priceless shocked expressions as family members flipped through pages detailing my extensive undeniable holdings.
But you live in that small apartment, Aunt Catherine protested weakly, her voice thin with disbelief. You drive that old Toyota?
By choice, I replied, my gaze firm, not necessity. Grandma taught me that displaying wealth and building wealth are often opposing goals. I chose to focus on the latter. Uncle Richard had turned an interesting shade of gray as he scrutinized my financial documents. His brow furrowed in genuine bewilderment. How did you manage this without family connections, without our network? The genuine confusion in his voice almost made me laugh aloud. I used the principles Grandma taught me. I explained, my voice clear and confident, about patient investing and identifying undervalued properties with growth potential. The same principles this family seems to have abandoned in favor of flashy developments and status-driven acquisitions. I removed another document from my portfolio, this one showing my official ownership of the luxury apartment complex. And regarding the mysterious owner you were planning to pressure and harass, I continued walking around to place the document directly in front of Victoria, who looked as if she'd seen a ghost. I believe you're all my tenants. The room erupted in chaos. Blake knocked over his water glass with a loud clatter. Brad began sputtering incoherent denials, his face a mask of furious disbelief. And Victoria stared at the document as if it might physically bite her. Uncle Richard, his face a stormy mask of rage and humiliation, attempted to regain control, his voice sharper than I'd ever heard it. This is impossible. You couldn't possibly have acquired that building. The purchase price was well over $20 million. I smiled, enjoying his profound discomfort. $28 million, actually, all legally and ethically acquired through careful investment growth over 10 years. I turned to address my cousins directly, my voice carrying clear authority. So when you complained about construction noise during breakfast, Victoria, you were complaining about security upgrades I ordered after the break-in on the 12th floor. And Blake, that unnecessary guest registration policy, came after 3 separate incidents of unauthorized people accessing the gym and pool areas. Their expressions of utter shock, bewilderment, and dawning humiliation would have been comical under different circumstances. Uncle Richard was rapidly flipping through my financial statements, his brow furrowed in desperate concentration. Even if this is all true, he said, his voice strained, it doesn't change the family voting structure regarding the mansion sale. The agreements have been prepared based on the established shareholding percentages. This was the moment I'd been meticulously preparing for. I placed one final definitive document on the table, the incorporation papers for Elizabeth's Legacy Trust. Actually, there's been a recent change in ownership structure. As of 900 this morning, I've transferred all my holdings to Elizabeth's Legacy Trust, which has simultaneously purchased Jenkins Development Company. I paused, letting the full seismic implications sink in. Jenkins Development Company, as you might recall, owns 30% of Bennett family holdings acquired slowly over the years through various proxy purchases. The color drained completely from Richard's face as he finally horrifyingly understood the true magnitude of what had just happened. That's not possible, he whispered, his voice barely audible, his eyes wide with a dawning terror. We would have known. Would you? I asked quietly, letting the question hang in the stunned silence. You were all so convinced of my financial insignificance that no one bothered to notice what I was actually doing all these years. I turned to the entire family, speaking with a calm, unyielding authority that silenced even Brad's sputtering, incoherent denials. With my newly consolidated voting shares, I now control 35% of Bennett family holdings. Not quite a majority, but enough to block any major decision, including the sale of this mansion. The silence that followed was absolute deafening. Even the usually unflappable Richard seemed utterly at a loss for words, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. Finally, Jessica broke the tension with a slow, appreciative clap. Well played, cousin. Grandma would be so proud. Brad, never one to accept defeat, gracefully pushed back violently from the table, his chair scraping loudly. This is some kind of trick. You can't just swoop in and take control after contributing nothing to the family business for years. I fixed him with a steady, unwavering gaze. I haven't taken control, Brad. I've prevented the dismantling of Grandma's legacy by people who've fundamentally forgotten what that legacy truly means. I calmly gathered my documents and returned to my seat, letting them process the seismic shift that had just occurred. The mansion sale is off the table, I stated flatly, unequivocally. As for the apartment complex, rest assured, I have no plans to evict family members, though I will be reviewing the significant rent discounts some of you have been receiving compared to other tenants. Victoria's face flushed crimson with anger or embarrassment, possibly both. Uncle Richard, ever the strategist, was already recalibrating his expression, shifting from shock to a calculating assessment of how to adapt to this terrifying new reality. Perhaps we should discuss a more collaborative approach to family holdings going forward. He suggested, his tone notably more respectful, almost deferential, than it had been just minutes ago. "I think that's wise," I agreed, a subtle satisfaction in my voice. Starting with a review of Grandma's original vision for the family legacy, one based on stewardship rather than shallow status, on growing wealth thoughtfully rather than displaying it ostentatiously. As I looked around at their stunned, chastened faces, I felt not triumph, but a quiet, profound satisfaction that finally, after all these years, they were seeing me truly. Seeing me for the very first time. In the days following my shocking revelation, the Bennett family dynamics underwent a seismic, utterly unpredictable shift. The immediate aftermath in that conference room was a chaotic blend of disbelief and desperate recalibration. Uncle Richard frantically attempting to salvage his shattered authority. Brad alternating between furious disbelief and clumsy, transparent attempts to reframe our relationship, Victoria suddenly discovering a deep, newfound respect for my business acumen that had apparently been invisible to her for decades. The transformation was both fascinating and entirely transparent. Richard was predictably the first to adjust his approach, inviting me to a private lunch the very next day at his exclusive club, a place he'd never once suggested I join him before. "I've clearly underestimated you," he admitted, studying me with new, calculating eyes across the impeccably white tablecloth. "Perhaps we've all been blinded by traditional expectations of success." I merely sipped my water, neither accepting nor rejecting his thinly veiled olive branch. "Grandma would say we've confused the substance of wealth with its symbols," I replied calmly. He nodded thoughtfully, a forced smile playing on his lips. "Elizabeth always did have a different perspective than most of the family. I see now she passed that to you." His attempt at reconciliation was predictable, but it clearly came with strings-attached proposals for joining forces and leveraging our combined influence that revealed he still hadn't grasped the fundamental difference in our values.
I listened politely, but made no commitments, explaining that any future collaboration would need to unequivocally align with the principles of responsible stewardship that Grandma had championed.
Aunt Catherine attempted a different, equally transparent approach, inviting me to her country club for tea, and suddenly expressing passionate interest in my philanthropic vision after years of dismissing my charitable contributions as insignificant. The strain of pretending she hadn't spent years condescending to me showed in the tight corners of her forced smile. "Family is so important, don't you think, despite our little differences through the years?" She suggested, patting my hand in a maternal gesture that would have been touching if it weren't so transparently calculating. Brad took even longer to approach me, his pride clearly wounded beyond measure by the revelation that his supposedly struggling cousin was substantially wealthier than him. When he finally called, it was with a clumsy business proposal. A development project he claimed needed my unique perspective. Though it was transparently clear he was primarily interested in gaining access to my capital, I declined politely but firmly, suggesting he revisit some of Grandma's foundational investment principles if he wanted to discuss future collaborations. Not everyone's reaction was self-serving, however. Jessica, who had stood by me during the revelation, remained a steadfast, genuine ally in the family reconfiguration that followed. "It's like watching a nature documentary," she joked over coffee a week after the confrontation. "Observe as the Bennett family members adapt to the new apex predator in their natural habitat." We laughed together, the genuine warmth of our connection standing in stark contrast to the suddenly solicitous attention from relatives who had previously dismissed me so casually. I made conscious decisions about which relationships to nurture and which to maintain at a polite professional distance. Those who showed genuine remorse for their previous treatment earned second chances and opportunity to rebuild trust. Those who merely adjusted their behavior without real introspection, without genuine change, received professional courtesy, but little more. The future of Grandma's mansion became my first major project. Rather than selling to greedy developers, as Richard had planned, I proudly established it as the headquarters for the newly formed Elizabeth Bennett Foundation, dedicated to vital, affordable housing initiatives and comprehensive financial education for underserved communities. The irony wasn't lost on me that the very family members who had mocked my supposed financial limitations would now somewhat awkwardly attend foundation events in a beautiful building preserved by the very wealth they hadn't known I possessed. I maintained my modest apartment and reliable Toyota, not out of necessity, but out of continued deliberate choice. The profound freedom of living, unburdened by others' superficial expectations, had become too valuable to abandon. Even now that my true financial reality was known, my cousins still occasionally expressed bewilderment at my preference for substance over superficial display, but they no longer dared to mistake it for inability or lack. The most meaningful consequence of my revelation came 6 months later, when Martha, our family's longtime beloved housekeeper, approached me at a foundation event hosted at the mansion. "Your grandmother visits me sometimes in my dreams," She confided, her weathered hand resting gently on mine, her eyes soft with emotion. Last night, she was positively glowing with pride. She said, "Martha Eliza understood all along what the others forgot, that wealth is meant to provide security for doing good, not for showing off." Tears pricked my eyes as Martha continued, her voice filled with profound warmth. "Miss Elizabeth always said you were the one who truly inherited the Bennett spirit, not just the name or the money, but the heart of it." That heartfelt validation coming from someone who had known my grandmother intimately meant more to me than all the newfound calculated respect from family members who had dismissed me for years. My healing journey wasn't instantaneous. The deep hurt of decades of condescension and exclusion couldn't be erased by a single dramatic moment of triumph. There were still family gatherings where old toxic patterns threatened to reassert themselves. Still moments when a careless comment from Brad or Victoria would for a fleeting moment reopen old wounds. But with each passing month, I grew more comfortable, more confident in my new role as a guardian of Grandma's true legacy, finding a delicate balance between forgiveness and maintaining healthy, firm boundaries. The greatest lesson I learned through this entire journey wasn't about money at all. It was profoundly about authenticity. For years, I'd allowed my family to misperceive me partly out of a strategic desire to operate unnoticed, but also partly out of a lingering subconscious desire for their elusive approval. The incredible freedom that came with finally being fully seen, whether they liked what they saw or not, was more valuable than any property in my portfolio. I discovered that success without integrity becomes hollow, a bitter victory, that wealth without purpose becomes a crushing burden, and that family connections without genuine mutual respect aren't worth maintaining. Today, as I sit in Grandma's rose garden, now beautifully preserved in perpetuity, through the foundation, I feel a profound sense of peace that truly transcends the mere vindication of that dramatic revelation day. The Bennett family continues to evolve. Some relationships are slowly, genuinely healing into something authentic, while others maintain a respectful, necessary distance. The mansion that was nearly sold for sterile condominiums now proudly hosts vital financial literacy programs for young people from backgrounds similar to my mother's. The humble kindergarten teacher who married into wealth, but never ever forgot the true value of hard work and unwavering character. I still drive my reliable Toyota to foundation meetings where Uncle Richard arrives in his flashy Bentley, but the crucial difference now is that we both understand it's my choice rather than my limitation. The true wealth I've meticulously built isn't just in my impressive real estate portfolio. It's in the profound freedom to live authentically, regardless of others' superficial opinions, to honor values that matter far beyond status and display, and to use privilege as a powerful tool for positive impact rather than selfish aggrandizement. So what about you? Have you ever been underestimated by family or friends, only to prove them spectacularly wrong later? Or maybe you're still in that quiet, building phase where others don't yet see your incredible potential. I'd truly love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this journey of quiet determination and ultimate vindication resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about finding strength and authenticity, even when others don't recognize your worth. Thank you for joining me today. And remember, sometimes the most powerful move isn't displaying your advantages, but patiently waiting for the perfect moment to reveal them.